She was supposed to be a sacrifice, a disposable, overweight daughter handed over to a ruthless Korean syndicate boss just to save her father's favorite child. But when the deadliest man in the city lifted her veil, he didn't see a punishment. He saw his queen. This is her story. In the gilded, suffocating halls of the Hastings estate in Roland Park, Baltimore, Chloe Hastings was a ghost. She was 24 years old, a brilliant, sharp-witted black woman with a degree in finance that she was never allowed to use. In the eyes of her father, Richard Hastings, Chloe was only two things: a bitter reminder of his first wife and an embarrassment. Chloe was a plus-sized woman in a family that worshipped at the altar of superficial perfection, while her younger half-sister, Isabella, thin, blonde, and impeccably styled, was paraded around high society galas. Chloe was kept in the shadows. Richard, a ruthless real estate mogul whose legitimate businesses were heavily propped up by underground money laundering, treated Chloe with a cold, dismissive cruelty. She was the family's dirty secret, too fat, too dark, and too stubborn. As Richard would drunkenly sneer during the rare family dinners she was permitted to attend. But Richard's arrogance had finally caught up with him. He had been quietly skimming money off the top of a massive shipping operation down at the port of Baltimore. The operation belonged to Arthur Kwan. Arthur was the head of a notoriously violent Korean Mafia syndicate that had taken over the eastern seaboard smuggling routes. Arthur wasn't just a thug, he was a phantom. Educated, impeccably tailored, and utterly devoid of mercy, he had built an empire on loyalty and absolute terror. When Arthur discovered the missing $15 million, he didn't send police. He sent a heavily armed tactical team to Richard's private office. Chloe was in the estate's library when the screaming started. She had crept out of her room to return a stack of books, only to freeze at the top of the grand staircase. Down in the foyer, Richard was on his knees. His designer suit was torn, his face bloodied. Standing over him was Silas, Arthur Kwan's towering enforcer. "Mr. Kwan demands payment by midnight." Silas's voice echoed against the marble walls, flat and terrifyingly calm. "Or he takes your life, your properties, and your legacy. But Mr. Kwan is a reasonable man. He knows your cash is tied up in the Cayman accounts. So, he asked for collateral. The one thing you value." Richard was weeping, a pathetic display from a man who usually ruled with an iron fist. "Anything. Take the harbor properties. Take the cars." "Mr. Kwan wants your daughter," Silas said. "Isabella. He has seen her at the charity galas. She will come to the compound. If you pay the debt in 6 months, she returns unharmed. If you don't, she belongs to the syndicate." Chloe watched in horror from the shadows as Richard's face went completely pale. Isabella was his golden goose, his bargaining chip for a future political marriage. He couldn't lose her to a mobster. "Yes," Richard choked out, his eyes darting frantically. "Yes, of course. Send a car tonight at 11. She will be ready." When Silas left, Richard collapsed on the floor. Isabella, who had been hiding in the drawing room, ran out, sobbing hysterically. "Daddy, you can't. You can't give me to them. They'll kill me. They're monsters." "Hush, Bella," Richard said, his voice suddenly going dangerously quiet. He slowly pulled himself up, wiping the blood from his mouth. A sick, twisted smile crept onto his face. He looked up, his eyes locking onto the shadows at the top of the stairs where Chloe was hiding. "I'm not sending you to Arthur Kwan." Chloe's heart dropped into her stomach. She stepped back, but Richard was already pointing at her. "Grab her!" Richard barked at his private security guards. Chloe fought. She kicked, screamed, and clawed as two massive men dragged her down the stairs. "Dad, no, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. Richard grabbed her by the jaw, his fingers digging painfully into her cheeks. "You've been eating my food and living under my roof for 24 years, contributing absolutely nothing. You shame me every time you walk into a room. You want to be useful? Now is your chance." "He asked for Isabella," Chloe screamed, spitting blood onto the marble floor. "Arthur Kwan thinks he can humiliate me by taking my prized possession," Richard sneered. "Let's see how he feels when he opens his little gift box and finds a fat, worthless pig instead. It's an insult for an insult." "He'll kill you! He'll kill us both!" Chloe sobbed. "He won't kill me. I'll be on a private jet to Zurich by midnight with Bella," Richard whispered maliciously. "What he does to you, however, is no longer my concern. They dragged her into the basement. A doctor on Richard's payroll was already waiting with a syringe. The last thing Chloe remembered before the heavy, dark waves of sedatives pulled her under was the sound of her sister packing luxury luggage upstairs, completely indifferent to the fact that Chloe was being sent to a slaughterhouse in her place. Consciousness returned to Chloe like a slow, painful tide. The first thing she registered was the smell of expensive cedarwood, leather, and rain. The second was the sickening softness of the bed beneath her. She gasped, her eyes snapping open. She wasn't in a basement, and she certainly wasn't in a shipping container. She was lying in the center of a massive, minimalist bedroom that looked like it belonged in an architectural digest. Floor to ceiling windows revealed the glittering nighttime skyline of downtown Baltimore. Rain lashed against the reinforced glass. Panic seized her chest. She scrambled backward against the velvet headboard, her breathing ragged. She looked down at herself. She was still wearing the oversized, comfortable sweatpants and t-shirt she had been reading in. Her father hadn't even bothered to dress her up for the sacrifice. I wouldn't move too quickly. The sedatives in your system are heavy. The voice came from the darkest corner of the room. It was deep, smooth, and laced with a terrifying authority. Chloe froze. From the shadows of a high-backed leather reading chair, a man stepped forward. Arthur Kwan was nothing like the brutal, scarred thug Chloe had imagined. He was devastatingly handsome, with sharp, aristocratic features, dark eyes that missed nothing, and black hair styled meticulously. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit without a tie, the top two buttons of his shirt undone. He moved with the silent, predatory grace of a big cat. He stopped at the foot of the bed, a crystal glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked at her, really looked at her. His gaze slowly trailed from her terrified, tear-stained face, down her full, trembling figure, and back up to her dark, defiant eyes. Chloe braced herself. This was it. This was the moment he realized he had been duped. This was the moment the Korean mob boss would pull a gun and end her life for her father's insolence. "You're not Isabella Hastings," Arthur said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of absolute fact. I know," Chloe whispered, her voice cracking. "My father, he tricked you. He put me on the transport instead." Arthur took a slow sip of his drink. "I am aware. My men tracked Richard's private jet taking off an hour ago. He's running." Chloe closed her eyes, tears leaking through her lashes. "I'm sorry. Please. I don't know anything about his business. I don't know the bank account passwords. I'm nothing to him. He sent me as a joke." "A punishment." "A punishment for who?" Arthur asked, tilting his head slightly. "For you," Chloe sobbed, burying her face in her hands, entirely consumed by the shame and horror of it all. "Because you wanted his beautiful daughter, so he gave you the fat, ugly one to humiliate you. You can just shoot me. Just get it over with, please." Silence stretched in the room, so thick and heavy it felt suffocating. Chloe waited for the click of a gun. She waited for the rage. Instead, she heard a low, dark chuckle. Chloe lowered her hands, staring at him in sheer bewilderment. Arthur Kwan was smiling. It wasn't a warm smile. It was sharp, dangerous, and utterly captivated. "Your father," Arthur said softly, walking slowly around the bed toward her, "is a remarkably stupid man." He set his glass on the nightstand and leaned down, bracing his hands on the mattress on either side of her. He was so close she could smell the bergamot and expensive scotch on his breath. Chloe pressed herself flat against the headboard, her heart hammering wildly. "He thinks," Arthur whispered, his dark eyes locking onto hers, "that he insulted me. He thinks he handed me a piece of trash. But what Richard doesn't realize is that he just gave me the only person in the Hastings family with a brain, a spine, and actual worth." Chloe's breath hitched. "What?" "I know exactly who you are, Chloe," Arthur murmured. "I've known for months. I know you audited your father's shell companies when you were just 21 and figured out exactly how much he was stealing from me. I know he threatened to lock you in an asylum if you ever spoke of it. I know you've been secretly running the financial models that keep his crumbling empire afloat from your bedroom, while he takes all the credit." Chloe stared at him, her mind short-circuiting. How could you possibly know that?" Arthur reached out. Chloe flinched, expecting a strike, but his large, warm hand gently brushed a tear from her dark cheek. His touch was surprisingly tender, sending a confusing jolt of electricity down her spine. I run the city, Chloe. I make it my business to know where the real power lies in my enemies' houses, Arthur said quietly. Isabella is a pretty, empty vase. She would have cried for a week, and I would have sent her back. But you? He stepped back, his eyes running over her curves with an intensity that made Chloe's skin flush hot. There was no disgust in his gaze. There was raw, unfiltered hunger. You are a survivor, Arthur continued, his voice dropping an octave. And you are magnificent. Your father thought he was handing me a punishment, but he just gave me my queen. Chloe sat frozen, her chest heaving. The most dangerous man in the city wasn't going to kill her. He was looking at her like she was the prize he had wanted all along. So, Arthur said, turning toward the heavy oak door. Rest tonight, Chloe Hastings. Tomorrow, we burn your father's empire to the ground, and you're going to help me do it. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, waking Chloe from the first genuinely restful sleep she had experienced in years. For a fleeting second, she thought she was back in her dreary, cramped room at the Hastings estate. But the feel of the 1,000-thread-count Egyptian cotton sheets against her skin and the sprawling view of Baltimore's inner harbor brought the terrifying, exhilarating reality crashing back. She was the captive, no, the guest of Arthur Kwan. Chloe sat up, pulling the heavy duvet around her. On the sleek glass vanity across the room, a series of garment bags hung from a brass rack. A small, cream-colored envelope sat on the bedside table. Your father dressed you to hide you. I prefer you to be seen. Join me for breakfast when you're ready. A. Curiosity overriding her lingering anxiety, Chloe approached the vanity. She unzipped the first bag. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the oversized, shapeless tunics or drab sweatpants her father had always forced her to buy to cover up her bulk. It was a stunning, custom-tailored emerald green dress from a high-end designer. Next to it was a pair of wide-leg silk trousers and a perfectly fitted cashmere blouse. They were her exact measurements. Arthur hadn't just guessed, he had paid attention. When Chloe slipped on the emerald dress, she looked at the full-length mirror and barely recognized herself. The rich color made her rich, dark skin absolutely glow. The cut hugged her full hips and accentuated her waist, celebrating her curves instead of burying them. For the first time in 24 years, Chloe didn't see a punishment. She saw a powerhouse. She found Arthur in the expansive dining room, sitting at the head of a long mahogany table, scattered with iPads and financial dossiers. He was speaking in rapid, hushed Korean into an encrypted phone, but the moment Chloe walked in, his words stopped dead. His dark eyes tracked her every movement as she approached. The raw, unfiltered appreciation in his gaze sent a flush of heat radiating from her chest all the way to her toes. Emerald is definitely your color, Arthur said, ending his call and tossing the phone onto the table. He stood up and pulled out a chair for her. I took the liberty of having a tailor from Manhattan send over a temporary wardrobe until you can have fittings. Arthur, Chloe started, her voice trembling slightly before she forced it to steady. Why are you doing this? I told you. My father shut me out of his legitimate accounts. I can't give you the 15 million he stole. Arthur nudged a plate of untouched pastries closer to her, the porcelain scraping softly against the table. A cup of black coffee followed. I don't care about the 15 million, Chloe, he said, his tone flat, almost dismissive. That's nothing. What matters is the system behind it. Richard built an empire, corrupt officials on his payroll, customs agents at the Port of Baltimore, layers of offshore shell companies. I want all of it, taken apart, piece by piece, and folded into my control. And you're the only one who understands how it's built. He pushed a sleek silver laptop toward her. The screen glowed with a complex map of interlocking corporations, accounts, and hidden channels, her father's world, laid bare in cold data. He thinks he's untouchable, Arthur continued, his voice lowering into something calm and dangerous. He landed in Zurich 3 hours ago. By now, he's already moving to liquidate everything he can through offshore accounts. Once it's done, he disappears. Clean. Untouchable. Chloe didn't respond immediately. Her eyes locked onto the screen, scanning lines of code and financial pathways that once felt like second nature. The patterns were familiar, almost comforting. But beneath that familiarity, something else stirred: anger, sharp and consuming. Her father hadn't just abandoned her, he had sacrificed her, left her to be destroyed. Her fingers moved to the keyboard, hovering for only a moment before they began to type. The hesitation was gone, burned away by something colder and more focused. He's not using the Cayman accounts anymore, Chloe said, her voice steady, her gaze narrowing as she traced the flow of funds. He knows they're compromised. He's shifted to a secondary ghost company in Cyprus, one he never used before. From there, the money gets rerouted. Her fingers tapped faster now, pulling threads together. He'll move it into a private vault, she continued, at a bank on parade plots in Switzerland. Quiet, untraceable, unless you know where to look. Chloe leaned back slightly, eyes still fixed on the screen. He's not running, she said softly. He thinks he's winning. Arthur leaned in, standing right behind her chair. She could feel the heat of his body, the intoxicating scent of bergamot wrapping around her. Can you intercept it? He asked softly. My father is a narcissist, Chloe typed furiously, her fingers flying across the keys. He never changes his foundational encryption codes because he thinks he's smarter than everyone else. He uses the date of his first successful real estate acquisition mixed with Isabella's birthday. It's pathetic. Within 20 minutes, Chloe had bypassed 3 layers of corporate firewalls. She watched the screen as a staggering number appeared: $84,500,000. There it is, Chloe whispered. His entire life's work. The money he bled from you, and the money he bled from thousands of tenants in his slum properties. Drain it, Arthur commanded, his hand resting firmly on her shoulder. The touch was grounding, a silent promise of absolute protection. Chloe didn't hesitate. With 5 keystrokes, she initiated a mass transfer, routing every single penny through Arthur's secure syndicate servers, effectively wiping Richard Hastings off the financial map. The balance on the screen blinked, refreshing to a beautiful, devastating $0. Arthur let out a low, victorious laugh. He spun her chair around so she was facing him. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. You, Arthur murmured, his eyes blazing with dark adoration, are the most dangerous creature I have ever met. The transfer was an absolute triumph, but in the ruthless world of the underground, power shifts never go unnoticed, and they rarely go unchallenged. While Arthur treated Chloe as an equal, his lieutenants were not so easily convinced. For 3 weeks, Chloe lived in the penthouse, working side by side with Arthur to systematically dismantle the remnants of Richard Hastings' empire. She absorbed the syndicate's operations, proving her genius time and time again. She and Arthur danced around an undeniable, electric attraction: stolen glances, lingering touches over keyboards, and late-night conversations over scotch where he listened to her ideas with a respect she had never known. But resentment was brewing. Donovan, Arthur's second-in-command for the East Coast Narcotics Division, hated the new dynamic. Donovan was an old-school mobster, brutal, misogynistic, and deeply suspicious of the black woman who had seemingly bewitched his boss overnight. The tension snapped on a rainy Tuesday evening. Arthur had left the penthouse to attend a mandatory sit-down with a rival cartel boss in Philadelphia, leaving Chloe in the heavily guarded syndicate headquarters downtown with Donovan and Silas. Chloe was in the server room, tracking a shipment of untraceable weapons, when the heavy steel door slammed shut, locking with an electronic thud. She spun around. Donovan stood by the door, flanking the exit with 2 of his loyal men. His hand rested casually on the grip of his holstered pistol. We have a problem, sweetheart, Donovan sneered, walking slowly toward her. Chloe stood her ground, smoothing the skirt of her custom Dior dress. She refused to let her voice shake. If there's an issue with the shipping logistics, Donovan, you can put it in a report for Arthur when he returns. Arthur's gone soft. Donovan spat, stopping a few feet away. He's letting a Hastings play in our sandbox. You think I don't know what you're doing? You're setting us up. Your old man is probably still pulling the strings, using you to get the syndicate's internal routing numbers. My father left me to die, Chloe said coldly, and I took $84 million from him. Does that sound like a setup? It sounds like a long con, Donovan countered, pulling his gun and pointing it directly at her chest. I'm not letting a spoiled, fat, little rich girl bring down an empire I helped build. I'm going to put a bullet in your head, dump your body in the Chesapeake, and tell Arthur you tried to sell our server data to the feds. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs, but her mind worked at lightning speed. She didn't look at the gun. She looked at the monitors behind Donovan. You're not doing this because you think I'm a mole, Donovan, Chloe said, a dangerous smirk playing on her lips. You're doing this because you know I'm running an audit on the narcotics ledger tomorrow. And you know I'm going to find the $3 million you've been skimming from the Baltimore docks over the last 6 months. Donovan's face went chalk white. The two men behind him exchanged nervous glances. Shut up, Donovan yelled, cocking the gun. You used a dummy corporation in Delaware to hide the stolen funds, Chloe continued, taking a step toward the barrel of the gun instead of away from it. The sheer audacity of her movement made Donovan falter. You named it Red Tide Holdings. A bit cliche, don't you think? I already found it, Donovan. In fact, I found it 3 days ago. You're lying. Am I? Chloe reached into her pocket and pulled out a small encrypted flash drive. Everything is on here. I was going to give it to Arthur tonight, but you've just forced my hand. Before Donovan could pull the trigger, the reinforced glass wall of the server room shattered inward with a deafening crash. Silas, Arthur's towering enforcer, stepped through the broken glass, his silenced submachine gun raised. He didn't hesitate. 2 muffled thwips echoed in the room, and Donovan's 2 men dropped to the floor. Incapacitate. Donovan spun around, raising his gun, but Silas was faster. A single shot blew the gun out of Donovan's hand, shattering his wrist. Donovan screamed, collapsing to his knees in a pool of his own blood. Silas calmly walked over, kicking the discarded weapon away. He looked at Chloe, his cold, deadpan expression unchanged. Mr. Kwan sends his regards. He suspected Donovan might try something while he was away. He instructed me to monitor the server room feeds. Chloe let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding, her knees finally shaking. At that exact moment, Chloe's cell phone rang. It was an international number. Switzerland. She looked at Silas, who nodded once. She answered the call, putting it on speakerphone. Chloe? The voice was ragged, desperate, and broken. It was her father, Richard Hastings. Hello, Richard, Chloe said, her voice dripping with ice. Chloe, listen to me, Richard pleaded, the sound of traffic echoing in the background. He sounded like a man drowning. The accounts. They're gone. The Swiss bank says the funds were routed out using my personal encryption. Someone hacked me. I have nothing. The hotel is kicking me and Isabella out, and the Russian creditors. They know where I am. I know, Chloe said smoothly. Dead silence on the other end of the line. Then a horrifying realization dawned on Richard. You? No, you're dead. Arthur Kwan killed you. Arthur Kwan gave me a seat at the table, Chloe corrected, staring down at the whimpering traitor Donovan, bleeding on the floor. You told me I was useless, Dad. You told me I was a punishment. But it turns out I'm a prodigy. I took your money, I took your empire, and I gave it all to the man you tried to cross. Chloe, please. You're my daughter. They're going to kill me. Isabella is crying. We have nowhere to go. Then you better start running, Richard, Chloe whispered, her eyes flashing with a ruthless, hard light that mirrored the mob boss who had claimed her. Because Arthur's men are already in Zurich, and they aren't coming for Isabella this time. She hung up the phone. The transformation was complete. The frightened, abused girl from the Hastings basement was dead. In her place stood the queen of the syndicate. Arthur Kwan returned to Baltimore exactly 12 hours after the server room incident. The heavy, reinforced steel doors of the syndicate headquarters parted for him. But instead of the usual silent, disciplined deference from his men, there was a palpable, buzzing tension in the air. The lower levels were too quiet. Men avoided his gaze, their eyes darting nervously to the floor. Arthur didn't need to ask what had happened. The sharp, acrid scent of industrial bleach masking the faint, lingering metallic tang of blood near the server wing told him everything he needed to know. He bypassed the main floor and found Silas standing guard outside the penthouse's private elevator. The towering enforcer's suit was immaculate, completely betraying the violence he had exacted hours prior. Report, Arthur demanded, his voice a low, dangerous hum that vibrated in the quiet corridor. Silas didn't blink, his posture rigid. Donovan attempted a coup at 21 hours. Sir, he cornered Miss Hastings in the server room with 2 loyalists. She had already uncovered his embezzlement from the Delaware shell companies. Instead of retreating, she baited him. She stood right in front of his weapon and manipulated him until he confessed to his crimes on the security feeds. I neutralized the threat exactly as you instructed. Arthur's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. And Chloe? Unharmed, sir, Silas replied, a faint, incredibly rare ghost of respect entering his usually monotone voice. She also fielded a call from her father during the cleanup. She stood over Donovan's bleeding body and calmly informed Richard Hastings that his entire net worth was gone and that your extraction team was waiting for him in Zurich. A slow, dark smile spread across Arthur's face. The terrifying phantom of the eastern seaboard didn't feel anger at the insubordination. He felt a surging, overwhelming wave of pride. He bypassed the elevator entirely and took the private stairwell 2 steps at a time. When he pushed open the heavy, carved oak doors to the penthouse library, he expected to find her shaken. Most seasoned criminals would need a drink to steady their hands after looking down the barrel of a trader's gun. But when he stepped inside, he found Chloe standing casually by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the glittering harbor. She was wearing a tailored black silk blazer over a dark crimson dress that hugged every curve of her full figure perfectly. A heavy crystal glass of vintage bourbon rested lightly in her hand. The nervous, shrinking girl who had arrived at his compound a month ago was completely gone. The black woman standing before him radiated absolute, unapologetic power. Hearing his footsteps, Chloe turned. Her dark eyes met his, calm and entirely unfazed. I leave you alone for 48 hours, Arthur murmured, walking slowly across the vintage Persian rug until he was mere inches from her. And you systematically dismantle my second in command and mentally break a fugitive on another continent. Chloe took a slow, deliberate sip of her bourbon. Donovan was a liability, Arthur. He lacked vision, and worse, he lacked discipline. He let his ego and his prejudice against me blind him to his own sloppy accounting. As for my father, I simply gave him the reality check he so desperately needed. Arthur reached out, gently prying the crystal glass from her fingers and setting it on the mahogany desk beside them. He looked down at her, his dark eyes blazing with an intensity that made the air in the room feel heavy, thick, and suffocating. Did you think I wouldn't protect you? Arthur asked, his voice dropping to a gravelly, intimate whisper. I told Silas to watch the feeds because I knew Donovan's pride couldn't handle taking orders from a woman, especially a Hastings. But I never expected you to stare down the barrel of a loaded gun just to prove a point. I wasn't trying to prove a point, Chloe replied, her chin tilting up defiantly, refusing to break eye contact. I was protecting what belongs to us. The word us hung in the air, a final, irrevocable shift in their dynamic. It wasn't a hostage and a captor anymore. It was an alliance, a partnership, a reign. Arthur's iron restraint finally snapped. He tangled his large hand in her dark, thick hair, pulling her flush against his solid chest. His mouth crashed down on hers, fierce, possessive, and claiming. There was nothing gentle about the kiss. It was a collision of two apex predators, a violent clash of intellect and raw, unbridled desire. Chloe gasped against his lips, dropping all her defenses as her hands instinctively gripped the lapels of his tailored suit, pulling him even closer. When he finally pulled away, both of them were breathing heavily. Arthur rested his forehead against hers, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. Your father thought he was throwing you to the wolves, Arthur whispered against her lips, reverence dripping from every word. He thought he was discarding trash. He didn't realize he was handing me the only woman in the entire world capable of ruling beside me. And what about Richard? Chloe asked, her voice breathless, but her mind sharp as ever. Your men in Zurich? Arthur chuckled, a dark, merciless sound that vibrated against her chest. Death is far too easy for a man like Richard Hastings. My extraction team intercepted him as he tried to flee his luxury hotel. They didn't put a bullet in his head. They stripped him of his passport, his remaining physical cash, and his designer luggage. We flagged his name and biometrics with every international banking authority and law enforcement agency in Europe. Chloe pictured it with pristine clarity, the biting, freezing rain of a Swiss night. Her father, the great, arrogant real estate mogul, forced out onto the cobblestone streets. Isabella, shivering in her thin designer clothes, screaming at a hotel concierge because her black cards were declining. They're ghosts with no money, Arthur continued, his eyes gleaming with vindictive pleasure. stranded in a foreign country. The Russian creditors your father owes are already tracking his scent. He has no leverage, no assets, and no one coming to save him. They'll have to beg, Chloe said, a wicked, deeply satisfied smile touching her lips. They'll finally know what it feels like to be completely powerless. They will, Arthur agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. While you conquer. The very next morning, Arthur called an emergency sit down with the 5 remaining lieutenants of his syndicate. The men gathered in the subterranean boardroom, a cold, windowless space designed for intimidation. They expected Arthur to take the head of the table. They expected a bloodbath over Donovan's treason. Instead, Arthur walked in and stood by the door, his arms crossed over his chest. Chloe walked in past him, carrying a single leather folder. She didn't hesitate. She walked directly to the head of the heavy iron table and sat down. The room went dead silent. A few of the older capos, men like Russo and Gallagher, exchanged furious, insulted glances. Gentlemen, Chloe began, her voice carrying clear and cold across the room. She opened the folder, tossing a stack of printed ledgers down the center of the table. Donovan is currently breathing through a tube because he stole $3 million from this organization. But more importantly, he lacked the intellect to hide it properly. I found his offshore accounts in 3 days. In the same amount of time, I've restructured our entire East Coast shipping logistics. By routing our legitimate imports through my father's old shell companies, I have effectively laundered $40 million of street cash, tax-free, in the last 48 hours. She leaned forward, bracing her hands on the table, staring down men twice her size. I am not here to play games. I am here to make you richer than you have ever been in your miserable lives. Anyone who has a problem taking orders from a black woman is welcome to walk out that door right now. But know that Arthur's enforcers are waiting in the hallway, and you will not leave this building alive. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Russo slowly picked up the ledger, his eyes scanning the impossible profit margins. After a long, agonizing minute, he closed the book, looked at Chloe, and nodded once. The rest of the men followed suit. The transition of power was absolute. 6 months later, the Baltimore skyline looked the same to the average citizen, but the underground had fundamentally shifted. Chloe no longer hid in the shadows. She attended high society galas, not as a pathetic accessory to the Hastings family, but as the wealthiest, most intimidating CEO in the room. When she walked into a venue, dripping in custom diamonds and wearing gowns that celebrated her full commanding figure, the room parted for her like the Red Sea. And always, standing right beside her, was Arthur Kwan. The phantom boss had finally stepped into the light, a lethal shadow utterly devoted to his queen. Standing on the balcony of their sprawling new estate that overlooked the city, Chloe leaned back against Arthur's chest. She thought back to the cold basement of her father's house, the sting of the sedative, and the sheer terror of being a punishment. What are you thinking about? Arthur murmured, kissing the crook of her neck. Just thinking about how a single, terrible betrayal turned out to be the greatest gift I ever received, she said softly, resting her hand over his. Arthur smiled against her skin. They just didn't know they were handing me my empire's greatest weapon. And that is how you turn a cruel punishment into an unstoppable empire. Chloe went from being a hidden, abused daughter to the absolute, undisputed queen of the criminal underworld, mentally breaking her toxic family and claiming the city's deadliest boss in the process. Never, ever underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose. If you love this epic story of revenge, raw power, and unexpected mafia romance, make sure to smash that like button, leave a comment about your favorite twist, and subscribe for more intense, dramatic stories.